He paid for a woman the way a man pays for a sack of flour or a new axe handle, with $10 silver that landed on the splintered bar with a sound like finality. She stood beside the saloon keeper, a small, still figure wrapped in worn cotton, her face a pale, emotionless mask that concealed everything and nothing. Her name, he was told, was Mai. She did not look at him. Her eyes were fixed on a crack in the floorboards, as if it were a map to a world far from this dusty, sun-bleached purgatory. The air was thick with the stench of whiskey and judgment. To the men watching, she was a curiosity, a piece of exotic porcelain to be owned. To Jonah, she was a solution. A pair of hands to work the homestead that had fallen silent when his wife's heart had stopped a year prior. As he led her out into the blinding street, her steps were so light they seemed to leave no impression in the dust. She thought he was taking her to a back room, a fate she had been steeling herself for, and a small, almost inaudible whisper escaped her lips, a prayer to an uncaring sky. "Please, just make it quick," Jonah heard it. The words, meant for no one, snagged in his mind like a burr. He said nothing, simply motioned toward the waiting wagon. The ride to his claim was a long expanse of silence, broken only by the creak of the wheels and the lonely cry of a hawk circling overhead. The land was as stark and unforgiving as the man who owned it, a vast canvas of muted browns and brittle grass, shadowed by mountains that scraped at the sky like jagged teeth. His home was not a home, it was a structure, a box of wood meant to keep out the wind, and it had the same hollow, haunted feeling as the man who now stood before it, a stranger holding the deed to her life. Her first days were a study in silent observation. The cabin was a monument to grief, coated in a fine layer of dust that softened every edge, as if the world itself had grown weary. A single plate and fork sat on the dry sink. A child's doll lay face down in a corner, its yarn hair tangled. The air was stagnant with the memory of what was, holding the shape of a life that had been abruptly extinguished. Mai began her work not with a clatter, but with a quiet, deliberate grace. She moved through the stillness like water, finding its own level. First, the floors, where the rhythmic scrape of a broom was the only sound. Then the windows, where she scrubbed away the grime until the pale afternoon light could finally spill onto the floorboards, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, restless ghosts. Jonah watched her from the doorway of the barn, his hands, calloused and capable, suddenly feeling useless. He had expected a servant, a presence to fill the functional voids of his life. He had not expected this gentle reclamation. He watched her hands, small but sure, as she kneaded dough on a floured board. Soon, the scent of baking bread, a scent so deeply tied to his past that it felt like a physical blow, filled the small cabin. It was the first warm, living smell the house had known in a year, an aroma of simple, profound domesticity that chipped at the ice encasing his heart. He ate the bread she left for him on the table without a word, but the warmth of it spread through him, a sensation so foreign he almost didn't recognize it. It was a language he had forgotten, a communication without words, a simple offering that said, "There is still life here." The quiet transformation continued, a slow and steady tide against the shores of his sorrow. One afternoon, while dusting the rough-hewn mantelpiece, Mai's fingers brushed against a small, tarnished object tucked behind a stack of old almanacs. It was a silver locket, oval and smooth, its surface clouded with neglect. She opened it carefully. Inside were two miniature portraits, one of Jonah, younger and smiling, the other of a woman with kind eyes and a gentle mouth. His late wife. The ghost who haunted every silent corner of the cabin. Mai felt a pang of empathy, a kinship with the unseen woman whose place she had, in a way, usurped. She did not hide the locket or discard it. Instead, she took a soft cloth and a little ash from the hearth and sat by the fire, patiently, methodically polishing the silver. She worked until it shone with a soft, lunar glow, reflecting the firelight back into the room. She didn't put it back in the shadows. She placed it in the center of the mantel, propped upright, a quiet testament to a love that had once filled this space. When Jonah came in from the cold that evening, his eyes immediately fell upon it. He stopped dead, his breath catching in his throat. He saw not an act of replacement, but an act of respect. This strange, silent woman was not trying to erase his past, she was tending to it, honoring it. He walked to the fireplace and picked up the locket, its polished surface warm from the fire. For the first time, he saw her not as a purchase, but as a person who understood the deep, unspoken grammar of loss. He said nothing, but a subtle shift occurred within him, the first crack in a long frozen river. His daughter, Lily, was a whisper of a child, a small shadow that flitted along the edges of his life. She was 6 years old but carried the silence of an old woman, her laughter unlike buried with her mother. She had watched me from a distance, her large, dark eyes filled with a solemn curiosity. She saw the way I moved, the gentleness in her hands as she mended a tear in a curtain or coaxed a flame in the hearth. One morning, as I sat on the porch step, carving a piece of scrap wood with a small knife, Lily approached. She stood a few feet away, a silent sentinel, watching the slivers of wood fall away to reveal a shape. I did not speak, did not startle her. She simply continued her work, and when she was done, she held out her hand. In her palm lay a small, rough-hewn bird, its wings half spread as if caught between rest and flight. Lily hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward and took the bird, her small fingers closing around the wood. It was the first gift she had received in a year. That evening, as Jonah sat cleaning his rifle, Lily came to him, clutching the wooden bird. She was quiet for a long time, and then she spoke, her small voice cutting through the heavy silence of the room with the force of a bell. "Papa," she said, looking not at him but at the fire. "Why is her face sad?" The question struck Jonah with a physical force. He had seen Mai's face as a mask, a blank canvas for his own assumptions. He had never truly considered the life, the history, the sorrow that existed behind her eyes. His daughter, in her innocence, had seen what he had refused to, that the woman in his house was not a commodity, but a fellow soul adrift in a sea of grief. He had no answer for his child. The small wooden bird became a bridge. Lily, emboldened by the silent offering, began to spend more time near Mai. She would sit quietly on the floor, watching as Mai worked, the bird always clutched in her hand. One day, Mai produced a simple loop of string and, with a few deft movements of her fingers, created a cat's cradle. Lily's eyes widened. Tentatively, she reached out, and Mai showed her how to lift the pattern, to create a new one. Soon, a soft, hesitant sound filled the cabin, a sound Jonah had not heard since the frost took the last of the autumn flowers. It was Lily's laughter. It was not a loud or boisterous thing, but a delicate, quiet bubbling of joy that seemed to hang in the air like a promise. Jonah would watch them from a distance, through the grimy window of the barn or from the edge of the woods. He saw his daughter, his withdrawn, ghostly child, slowly coming back to life under the patient, gentle care of this foreign woman. He saw Mai's face soften when she looked at Lily, a genuine warmth finally breaking through the stoic mask. He felt a complicated knot of emotions tighten in his chest, a deep, aching grief for what he had lost, a pang of guilt for what he had failed to provide his daughter, and a nascent, terrifying flicker of hope. He started leaving small tokens on the porch rail where they would find them, a particularly smooth river stone, a brightly colored feather, a wild apple, polished on his sleeve. He never acknowledged the gifts, and they never thanked him for them, but a new, unspoken language was developing between the three of them, a fragile ecosystem of care built in the heart of a desolate world. As autumn bled into winter, the sky grew heavy and grey, the color of old iron. The wind began to whisper, then howl, clawing at the cabin with invisible, sharp fingers. A storm was coming, a blizzard that the old-timers spoke of in hushed tones, the kind that could bury a house and erase the world for days. Jonah worked tirelessly to prepare, securing the livestock, chopping enough wood to last a week, his movements grim and efficient. Inside, Mai was just as busy, sealing cracks in the walls with mud and cloth, ensuring their small fortress was as ready as it could be. The world outside shrank, the vast, open prairie disappearing behind a thick, swirling curtain of white. The cabin, once a symbol of isolation, now became their entire universe, a small, warm pocket of life against the immense, frozen power of the storm. It was on the second night, as the wind screamed like a banshee and the snow piled in drifts against the door, that Lily began to cough. At first, it was a small, dry sound, but it soon deepened, a rattling in her small chest that struck terror into Jonah's heart. By morning, she was burning with fever, her skin hot to the touch, her breaths coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The storm had sealed them in. There was no doctor, no town, no help. There was only the three of them, trapped by the fury of the elements, facing a threat far more intimate and terrifying than the cold. Jonah, a man who could face down a predator or a hard winter, was utterly, terrifyingly helpless. He paced the small cabin like a caged animal, his stoicism shattered, replaced by a raw, primal fear. He could break a wild horse and fell a tree with an axe, but he could do nothing against the fire that was consuming his daughter from within. He watched as Mai, her face a mask of calm concentration, took control. She dipped cloths in a basin of snowmelt and laid them on Lily's forehead. She brewed a strange, bitter-smelling tea from a pouch of dried herbs she had kept tied at her waist, coaxing the hot liquid past the child's cracked lips. She did not panic. She worked with a quiet competence that was both a comfort and a rebuke to his own helplessness. For 2 days and nights, they kept vigil together, the only sound the howling of the wind and Lily's labored breathing. In the deep, dark hours of the second night, with the fire burning low and the shadows dancing on the walls, she finally spoke of her past. Her voice was a low murmur, telling him of a village by a different river, of a family who sold her to pay a debt, of a younger brother she had nursed through a similar fever, only to lose him. Her story was not a plea for sympathy, but a simple statement of fact, a sharing of a burden. In that moment, surrounded by the storm, united in their fear for the child, Jonah saw the full, terrible depth of her resilience. She was not just a survivor, she was a protector, a healer. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the profound strength forged in the crucible of her own unspeakable losses. A deep, powerful wave of respect, fierce and absolute, washed over him, cleansing the last of his transactional coldness. The storm broke on the 4th day. The wind died down to a whisper, and a weak, watery sun emerged, turning the snow-covered landscape into a blinding expanse of white. Lily's fever had broken in the night, and she was sleeping peacefully, her breathing finally even and deep. A fragile, exhausted peace settled over the cabin. But the peace was short-lived. Later that afternoon, 2 figures on horseback appeared, dark smudges against the snow, making their way slowly toward the homestead. Jonah recognized one of them instantly. It was Harker, the saloon keeper who had sold Mai to him, a man whose smile never reached his cold, calculating eyes. He and his companion reined in their horses near the porch, their presence an ugly violation of the hard-won sanctuary. Harker dismounted, his boots sinking into the deep snow. "Heard you were snowed in," he called out, his voice slick with false bonhomie. "Just checking on my investment." Jonah stepped out onto the porch, positioning himself in the doorway. He said nothing. "Thing is, Jonah," Harker continued, his eyes flicking past him, trying to peer into the cabin, "I've had a better offer for the girl. A fella over in Blackstone, willing to pay double. Our deal was more of a rental, you see. I'm here to collect her." Mai, who had been standing behind Jonah, flinched as if struck. All the color drained from her face. The world, which had just begun to feel safe, was once again a place of transactions and terror. She saw the familiar, predatory glint in Harker's eyes, and the cruel reality of her situation came crashing down. She was property, to be bought and sold at a man's whim. Jonah did not move. He remained framed in the doorway, a silent, unmovable obstacle. His face was granite, his eyes as cold and hard as the winter landscape around them. Harker misread his silence as weakness, the same hollowed-out passivity he had seen in the saloon weeks ago. "Now, don't make this difficult," Harker sneered, taking a step toward the porch. "Just send her on out. You got your use out of her." But the man he was speaking to was not the same man who had paid $10 silver in a dusty saloon. The hollow shell had been filled. Grief had been replaced by a fierce, protective fire. The storm had not broken him, it had forged him. When Jonah finally spoke, his voice was low and gravelly, but it carried across the snow with the weight of absolute authority. "Get off my land," Harker laughed, a short, ugly sound. "I ain't leaving without what's mine." He reached for the pistol at his hip. In that instant, Jonah moved. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. He simply took one step forward, planting his feet firmly on the porch, his entire being a declaration. He placed his hand on the doorframe, symbolically sealing the entrance, shielding the two souls behind him from the world. "She is not yours," he said, the words clear and precise. "She is home," the words hung in the frigid air. "She is home." It was not a statement of ownership, but a declaration of belonging. It was a public choice, a definitive claim that had nothing to do with money or contracts. Harker looked into Jonah's eyes and saw not a grieving widower, but a husband and a father defending his family. He saw a line that could not be crossed. After a long, tense moment, Harker slowly lowered his hand, his sneer faltering. He spat on the snow, muttered a curse, and turned back to his horse. He knew a lost cause when he saw one. The two riders disappeared over the horizon, leaving only their tracks in the pristine snow, a temporary scar that would soon be erased by the wind. The silence that descended upon the homestead was different now. It was not the empty, aching silence of grief, nor the tense, uncertain silence of strangers. It was a deep, quiet peace, the kind that follows a battle won. Mai stood in the doorway, her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She had been bought, sold, and threatened, but for the first time in her life, someone had stood for her. Someone had declared her worthy of protection, had named her a part of a home. Jonah turned from the door and looked at her. All the walls between them had crumbled, washed away by the storm and the threat. He saw the fear and the disbelief and the dawning hope in her eyes. He walked toward her and slowly, gently, he reached out and took her hand. His calloused, rough fingers wrapped around hers. It was not a gesture of ownership or of payment, but of connection, a simple, profound acknowledgement of the bond that had been